Good evening. Thank you all for joining us. Before we begin tonight's meeting, I'd like to welcome everyone to our virtual meeting. I'd like to explain this meeting format. Tonight we have commissioners and staff visible on video feed. Members of the public have been invited to comment on Wheatridge Speaks in advance of tonight's meeting and are also able to participate live through web link or by calling in on the phone. You can find that information on our meeting agenda at wheatridgespeaks.org. All members of the public who are participating live have been muted. When it is time for public comment at the start of our meeting as part of the public hearing, we will unmute all members of the public, and I'll ask you to speak in order based on the first letter of your last name. When we unmute the public, please keep background noise to a minimum. You may choose to mute yourself through your own device. If you do not plan to participate at all this evening, we recommend you simply view the meeting live by watching on channel 8 or on wheatridgespeaks.org. If you do plan to participate this evening when you speak, please first state your name clearly, spell your last name, and give your street address for the record. The time limit for public comment is 3 minutes per person. Speakers may not donate their time. When there are no more speakers, I will close the time for public comment and public participants will be muted again. We appreciate your patience with this virtual format. As with in-person meetings, our hope is that we create a friendly and respectful atmosphere for public dialogue. We appreciate your help in this process. Thank you. I'd now like to call the City of Wheatridge for Planning Commission for November 19th, 2020 to order. May I get a roll call, members, please?
Ari Kritchever.
Here.
Jahi Sembai.
Here.
Scott Ohm.
Here.
Melissa Antal.
Here.
Will Kearns. Dan Larson.
Here.
And Janet Leo and Christine Disney are absent tonight.
Thank you. The next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item is to approve the order of the agenda. Before we continue with our agenda, I'd like to explain how we'll be voting on items tonight. Once we have a motion and a second, until the recording secretary acknowledges that they have recorded those votes. After voting, the recording secretary will read the result of the vote to confirm it is recorded correctly. We will use this protocol for any voting scenario tonight. Is there a motion to approve the order of the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the order of the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? I will call for a vote. Please raise your hand visibly to vote in support of the motion.
Motion passed 6-0.
The next item is the approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from October 1st, 2020?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the minutes from October 1st, 2020. Is
there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Call for a vote. Please raise your hand in support.
Motion passed 6-0.
The next item is the public forum. We're at the public forum. This is the time for any person to speak on any subject not appearing on tonight's agenda. You will have a maximum of 3 minutes to speak. Speakers may not donate their time. Please give us your name, spell your last name, and share your address. We will now unmute all participants. Please keep background noise to a minimum. If you do not plan to speak at this time, you may mute yourself through your own device. Is there anyone wishing to speak whose last name begins with A through E? Is there anyone whose last name begins F through J? Is there anyone whose last name begins with K through O, P through T, U through Z. Is there anyone else from the public who'd like to speak on items not appearing on tonight's agenda? Please speak up now before we close the public forum. Is there nobody signed up or which?
We have 6 people in attendance. I think most of them are here for the first case, but I'm not certain. So.
Okay. I will now close the public forum. I'll now move on to the public hearings. We have 2 public hearings tonight. For the public hearing, we'll be adding appropriate staff and when applicable, the applicants to our video feed. Their screens will be shared as presentations are being made. They will remain a part of the video feed until the conclusion of the respective agenda items. After the presentations, the commission will ask any questions of staff and the applicant, and then we will conduct the public comment portion of the hearing. This will be conducted in the same manner as earlier by muting all our public participants. We typically administer an oath for any participant in a public hearing, staff, applicants, and the public. In this virtual meeting format, we are administering the oath in a different way. If you comment during a public hearing tonight by choosing to testify, you're agreeing that the testimony you give will be the truth as you know it. I now open the public case for WZ-20-07, an application filed by UFCW Local 7 Building Association for approval of the outline development plan, amendment to change the sign standards on property zone plan commercial development and located at 7760 West 38th Avenue, and ask for the staff report.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Our case manager, Zareen Tasneem, one of the planners in our department, couldn't be here tonight, but she did prefer the presentation and be happy to take your questions afterwards. Let's see here. Can you see and hear?
Good evening. My name is Zareen Tasneem, and I am a planner with the City of Wheat Ridge's Community Development Department. I am presenting case number WZ-20-07, which is a request to amend the underlying planned commercial development zoning development standards for signage at 7760 West 38th Avenue. I would like to enter into the public record the contents of the case file, the zoning ordinance, the comprehensive plan, and this digital presentation. The property is within the City of Wheat Ridge. All appropriate notification and posting requirements have been met, and therefore the Planning Commission has justification to hear this case.
So noted.
This is a 2018 aerial with the property outlined in red. The property is located on the south side of West 38th Avenue, located between Yukon Court and Allison Street, about a block west of the intersection of 38th Avenue and Wadsworth Boulevard, where the Corners and the Wilmore Center commercial centers are located. Further to the west is the Lutheran Medical Campus. According to the Jefferson County assessors, the lot measures about 91,000 square feet, or just over 2 acres in size, and contains an office building built in 1979. The existing 4-story building on the site contains primarily offices for a union. The property is zoned planned commercial development. To the north and east are primarily commercial uses, which are zoned planned commercial development, PCD, mixed use commercial, MUC, and restricted commercial, RC. To the immediate southeast and south of the site are multifamily residential uses zoned residential 3 and planned residential development, PRD. To the west are properties zoned residential 2, R2, and consisting of mostly single-family residential homes. This is a view of the subject property looking southeast, which shows the existing freestanding sign. The existing sign is just under 10 feet, with the sign face measuring about 82 square feet. For the current ODP that applies to the site, one project identification sign is permitted at the site entrance with a maximum area of 50 square feet. and a maximum height of 10 feet. Many older ODPs were written to allow only what it was proposed at the time, and in that sense are perhaps more restrictive. There is nothing unique about the property that warrants a more detailed or unique regulatory framework for signs. The ODP did not anticipate a future change in signage, and it is appropriate to recognize such a change at this time. A new freestanding sign that aligns with the city's sign code cannot be achieved through a variance and may only be achieved through an amendment to the ODP. This table compares the existing freestanding sign conditions to the existing ODP sign standards and what could be allowed by amending the sign standards to match the city's standard sign code. By changing the ODP sign standards to follow the city's sign code, not only would it bring the existing sign into conformance, but it will also encourage reinvestments in a property since the applicant would like to install a new sign. The vast majority of properties in the city comply with the sign code, including most properties in the immediate area. Therefore, the amendment would result in signs that match the character of the area. The requirement of the ODP amendment process, a neighborhood meeting was held on July 7, 2020 in a virtual Zoom meeting setting due to the COVID-19 regulations. No members of the public attended the meeting. Prior to the neighborhood meeting, staff received one email from a neighbor in support of the proposal. Notes from the meeting are included in the staff report. Since Wheat Ridge is not a full-service city, we sent the application on referral to outside agencies, as well as completed an internal review. We did not receive concerns or objections from outside agencies or internal divisions. Before the hearing, the property was posted for 15 days and letters were sent to property owners within a 600-foot radius. Comments collected on Wheat Ridge Speaks will be reviewed by the planning commissioners and entered into the public record. Ultimately, staff is recommending approval of the request. In terms of process, any amendment to an ODP is processed like an ODP and is required to meet the ODP criteria. Staff provided that analysis in the staff report and is recommending approval of the request because it meets those criteria. The proposed amendment does not result in an adverse effect on the surrounding area. The amendment will provide opportunity for reinvestment. The amendment aligns with the changing needs of the development, and there's nothing unique on the property that warrants property-specific sign code standards. Therefore, it is appropriate for the site to comply with the city's standard sign codes. Planning Commission will recommend a decision to City Council, who will review the request also. If City Council approves the request, then the ODP amendment is approved. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
So Zareen, as I mentioned, couldn't be with us tonight, so I'll make just a couple more comments before I share the applicant's presentation. So as Zareen noted in the presentation, we had one letter of support prior to the neighborhood meeting. In the last 2 weeks, we didn't receive any additional comments or inquiries, including on Wheat Ridge Speaks. One other thing I want to let you know in terms of noticing, the applicant was in touch with me this afternoon because they realized that their posting sign was missing. They checked their security camera footage and it appears that the stronger winds earlier this week blew it away from its posting spot. The municipal code anticipates these kinds of unexpected issues with signs, and it specifically states the fact that a parcel was not continuously posted the full 15 days may not, at the discretion of the hearing authority, constitute grounds for continuance where the applicant can show a good faith effort to meet the posting requirements. So I wanted to make you aware of that, but also note that you are still able to conduct your hearing tonight and make a recommendation. The sign was in place for 10 of the 15 days. They offered to pick up a new sign this afternoon. It was around 3 p.m., but we didn't have anybody in the office because we're mostly also working from home. The hearing tonight was also in the newspaper, on the city's website, on Wheat Ridge Speaks, and as Zareen noted, included a mailing to property owners with our wider radius now of 600 feet. So I am recommending that you continue to conduct the hearing tonight. we will have that second hearing at City Council and a chance to reinforce the sign for that posting period. So I'll go ahead and play the applicant's comments and then promote them up to the panelist view here, and we can take your questions then. Let me share my screen. Okay, here we go.
Hi, this is Kevin Schneider. I'm the Secretary Treasurer for UFCW Local 7. We're wanting to replace the old outdated sign in front of our building, which is located at 7760 West 38th Avenue here in Wheat Ridge. And the sign and our building are both about 40 years old, and we're looking at taking down the old sign and putting up a new sign. But in order to do so, we need to have an outline development plan amendment for our property to make sure that the new sign is within the current standards and regulations of the general sign regulations for the city of Wheat Ridge. So we're asking that that be approved. Our union represents workers throughout the community at King Soopers and Safeway and Albertsons, as well as Kaiser Permanente. So your considerations with regards to approving our requested new sign and the amendment is appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, is that the end of the presentations?
Yes.
Let's see if the commissioners have any questions. Commissioner Sambayan?
Let me get to it. Apologize about that, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. One for you, a couple for you, Lauren, just more on the way that this was written. There's a statement in that says it is unclear based on city records why the existing sign does not conform with the ODP sign standards. And I was confused by that. It's unclear, or is it just that it doesn't conform?
Well, it doesn't conform, so it's larger than the ODP allows, but we don't have a lot of our older building permit records from the 70s and 80s, so we can't trace sort of the rationale of why somebody likely in our department approved the sign larger than what the zoning allows.
I got it, thank you. But the other question that I had, and I have a couple more, Mr. Chairman, do we need more formalized designs before we can approve this? I mean, there was just kind of a drawing of what it could look like, and there was mention of electricity and everything. Do we need more than that?
No, we don't. So for the purpose of this document, all we're trying to do is say that they can follow our existing sign codes. And then when that happens, you don't usually see that additional detail. It's just that we would see that detail through a building permit application and confirm that it complies with that sign code standards.
Okay.
Typically, just to follow up, because I think where you might be heading is often when you see a master sign plan, you get a lot more of that detail. And in this case, we're just trying to say, what are the rules that are going to apply for any future sign?
Got it. Two more questions for the applicant, Mr. Schneider. You mentioned a reinvestment in the property would happen with this sign. Did you think that there was not a good investment already in that area?
No, I think we're going to be able to draw some additional businesses into our location. We have a few vacancies in the building, and adding the new signage for the building and being able to put up leaseors or lessees, business establishments' names onto the new sign in order to help them be successful with their organizations, I think will benefit both them as well as the community.
Okay, thank you. One last question. It's kind of a two-part. The current sign is not powered at all. Is that correct?
No, the current sign has power to it. It has electrical lighting inside of the sign.
Okay. No, that's perfect then. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And if you wanted to, I do have a picture of what the new sign would look like if you want me to hold it closer to the camera.
I'm sure, absolutely. I'd love to see what you're thinking. Very nice. Thank you. No more questions, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Antal?
Yeah, maybe just a clarification, because so really this change, we have to do a formal amendment because it's a ODP, but they're really just asking to make a change that is consistent with the city's current sign code.
That's correct.
Right, okay. That was
Okay.
was it for me.
Commissioner Christopher?
No questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Larson?
Yeah, and if, Lauren, if you wouldn't mind, one more time for me, I'm maybe a little slow today, but the reason that we can't do a variance for this is, and we have to change the ordinance.
So we don't typically have, the way that the variance code is written is that it's exceptions to specific provisions in the zoning code in chapter 26. This is a provision within the property specific zoning in the ODP. So the way that the plan development regulations are written is that if you want to change or get a waiver from the standard in the ODP, you change the ODP itself. So, you know, it's challenging. This seems like we're sort of squashing mosquito with a sledgehammer with this process maybe. And I know the applicants, we've empathized with them in that respect. Some of our older plan developments did not have the benefit of foresight, but what this change will do is mean that they will have sort of all the flexibility that they need in the future and the same privilege of sign codes that almost all of our other commercial properties have. So unfortunately, a variance wasn't an option, certainly something that would have saved sort of everybody some time and heartache, but this will definitely be the best solution in the long run.
Okay, yeah, that helps, thank you.
Commissioner Kearns?
Yeah. So the sign you held up looks like it has an American flag on it and timestamp. Does that mean it's a video sign? Does it have a video screen in it?
Yes, it's got an electronic media center in the center of it. That's correct.
So okay, so it doesn't look like that was part of the presentation. I am seeing it in the applicant letter.
Yep, and so in the city's sign code in Article 7, we allow electronic message boards. There's some limitations on how quickly the image can change and what the illumination requirements are, but they are permitted on any freestanding or wall sign in the city.
What are the brightness levels?
What are the brightness levels?
Yeah, I mean, is there a rule on how bright this can be?
Yes, there are, and our code enforcement team, we actually changed those rules to make them more enforceable when we did a code amendment in 2018. So our code enforcement team now has light meters that they can use to check that a sign is conforming with those illumination standards.
And how often is this sign going to be changing in terms of video or in terms of messaging?
The code, I think, allows it to change every 8 seconds. So it's more, we describe it as more like a slideshow than a commercial. So it can't be animated or like a TV screen, but the slide can change every 8 seconds.
And then my next question is, this is being processed as a zone change. So what zone are we changing it to?
The zoning stays the same, so it's still a planned commercial development, but the zoning standard, the development standards as they relate to signage are what's changing. So it's a little bit of a sort of word game here, but by changing one of the development standards, we are effectively changing this property specific zoning document. So it doesn't change districts. It's still planned commercial development, and all the other regulations from the original ODP all still apply. So we're just changing this one component.
Okay, last question. Are there any other video signs in this area or along this corridor?
I know there's one at Burger King. I believe there's a few on Wadsworth. I believe one of the churches has one just further north on Wadsworth. But now you're testing my memory because I haven't commuted to the office in a while.
those signs are just black and red. This sign's gonna be full color, right?
I think they're full color as well. I believe Burger King and maybe even McDonald's. McDonald's, I think, is just one color, but I know Burger King has full color as well.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
I have two questions. One, is the sign staying in the exact same place as it is now?
Yes.
Okay. Because right now I noticed that it's kind of, kind of on the end there, and it's in an easement, but it's been that way forever. So, but if they change location, would that trigger something different?
It wouldn't necessarily trigger a different process. It's a good observation, and we made that specific notation when we did the referral to outside agencies. So we included in that referral, not just that we're changing the standard, but that the intent is to replace a sign within the easements, and we didn't get any concerns from those districts.
Okay. And I assume it looks pretty far back, so it's probably out of the sight triangle visibility, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Do any other commissioners have any further questions? Additional questions?
Yeah, one more. What kind of messaging is going to be on this video? Like, why do you need a video sign? What are you saying with it?
So there'll be probably a number of different things. When we've got, obviously, COVID's going on now, we could remind everyone to wear their masks when they're in the grocery stores to protect our members, our workers that we represent, would be an example currently we could have up there.
So perhaps Ms. Lauren, could you go over what the city can mandate as far as if a sign can say something or not?
Sure, yeah, I'll respond to that. And then we have another member of the applicant team I'm going to promote up who raised his hand, I think, to answer that question. So it's a good question. The sign code actually was modified in 2018 due to a Supreme Court ruling in the Reed versus Gilbert case, where we as a city cannot regulate the content of a sign. I think that's what you were asking about. So we changed our regulations at the time because we can address, it's called time, place, and manner. So sizes, setbacks, materials, how long the video display can be on there, but not what the actual content is. So for example, we got rid of the category of political signs because that necessitates that you read it. It's a little bit of a different way of doing things, but we've had that code in place now for about 2.5 years, and it's been working fairly well. What we often see with these kinds of message centers is advertisement of like a sale or a special event. Larry is a part of the applicant team, and it sounded like you might want to address that question as well.
Yes, thank you. The message center actually becomes kind of like a town crier. It shares information for the community. So for example, Vantage, who is the manufacturer of the electronic message center, their software ties into the FEMA program, so that if there's severe weather in the area, then that would actually come right into the existing data and would begin to announce to the community severe weather alert. If there was an amber alert, it would actually interject that into it to announce that to the community as well. So communities love the fact that it actually does provide a real community service in terms of allowing special announcements like that, which integrate themselves into the existing information. For example, as Kevin was mentioning, if they have a new tenant or an open space, they might be able to put a screenshot on there that would say space available and bring in a new tenant, which would benefit the community as well. So that's those are some things that it does allow.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
One more is
Yes.
there's some residential type uses nearby, neighbors, there's houses within easy visual shot of this video sign. Have they been notified? And I mean, I didn't see any comments in Wheat Ridge Speak, so maybe they don't mind, but to me, if I'm sitting on my front porch, I guess I don't want to see a video sign flashing at me with lights. Have you talked to your neighbors?
I can attest that I did receive notification in the mail.
There's really only one house that sits to the direct west of our property. That would be somebody that would be looking at the sign from their front porch, as you indicate. And there really isn't a porch there to sit on. And because the busy road noise that's always going by, I've worked at that location specifically since 1986. And in my 30 or 33 years, 34 years of working there, I've seen people getting in and out of their vehicle to go into the house. I can't even recall ever seeing anyone even sitting out there with a lawn chair just because of the traffic that goes by.
Okay, thanks.
Just to clarify too, so it wouldn't be allowed to flash. The way that I just pulled up the code just to confirm. So the way that it reads is that messages shall be static and a change in message shall be instantaneous. So it's we added a more stringent language when we updated this code, knowing that these could proliferate throughout the city, right? This is a part of the standard sign code. We haven't seen a proliferation as much as I expected, I think, because it is definitely an investment and they're expensive. But the goal of the code rewrite was to try to limit what I think you're describing as a potential nuisance.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Okay, I will now open the hearing for public comment. If you wish to comment on this case, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to speak. Speakers may not donate their time. When I recognize you, please give us your name, spell your last name, and share your address. We will now unmute all participants. Please keep background noise to a minimum. If you do not plan to speak at this time, you may mute yourself through your own device. And then it sounded like we only have maybe 6 people signed up.
Yeah, we now have 3 people in attendance. It looks like they're all in the Zoom platform. So if you want to raise your hand through Zoom if you'd like to speak, or if any of the 3 of you would like to unmute yourselves, you're welcome to do that. I'm not seeing any hands or unmuting yet.
Okay.
Another second or 2.
Nobody? Okay.
Nope.
Is there anybody on a telephone that's trying to call in, or no? Okay.
Nope.
Okay, if there's no one else, I will close the citizens forum. I close the public hearing and I would now entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman. I move to recommend approval of case number WZ 20-07, a request for an online development plan amendment to change the sign standards on property zoned planned commercial development for the following reasons. The proposed amendment does not result in the adverse effect on the surrounding area. The proposed amendment is consistent with the goals and objectives of the city's comprehensive plan. The amendment will provide additional opportunity for reinvestment in this area, and the criteria used to evaluate an ODP amendment supports the request.
Is there a second?
I'll second, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, I'll call for a vote. Please raise your hand if you support the motion.
Motion carries 5-1.
Thank you. Okay, we will now go on to the next case. I will now open up the public hearing for, bear with me. Case number ZOA-20-07, an ordinance repealing the reenacting section 26-609 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning access to public streets and making conforming amendments, and ask for the staff report. And I will also just add, we typically administer an oath for any participant in a public hearing, staff, applicants, and the public. In this virtual meeting format, we are administering that oath in a different way. If you comment during a public hearing tonight by choosing to testify, you're agreeing that the testimony you give will be the truth as you know it. May I please have the staff report?
Thank you. Good evening. For the record, again, Lauren McLack with the city's planning division. I don't have any slides tonight, so I'll just sort of share my comments on this case. Section 26-609 is in the zoning code and requires that all new development have access to public streets. And it seems simple enough, but there are actually a really wide range of ways to achieve that simple goal. And there are many considerations that go into the review and design of access. Our development review team at the city includes over 15 people with expertise from planning to engineering, building, and fire. And we have robust discussions about access when we're looking at development proposals. And many of those designs come to you all where there are also robust discussions on sort of how access is designed. The overarching goal of this code amendment is to ensure that access and circulation designs support logical and high quality site plans. All developments in the city have access to the public street network, but how they get that access can really vary, either directly from a new public street or from a private street or a private drive or through an access easement. We see a wide range of these different configurations, and which of those tools we use really depends on a wide range of variables. It's those variables and related considerations that we're now finally codifying with this ordinance. The amendment really provides better clarity for decision makers, for applicants, and for the public in terms of what we're thinking about and what might be at play when we're designing access, and whether that connection specifically ends up being public or private in design. So the things we're looking at include maintenance, design, emergency and fire access, the merits of any alternative designs, the land use for the property, including the number or type of dwelling units and the scope or scale of any non-residential uses. We're looking at the block length, the impact to the existing street network, and the provision of bicycle and pedestrian facilities, either on that new access or elsewhere on the subject property. That list of considerations is really at the heart of this proposed ordinance. The code currently tries to make distinctions between residential and commercial developments, and increasingly that's just not working because we're increasingly seeing projects that have either a mix of uses or a mix of housing types. So our development patterns today, they're just not as clear cut as they were 50 years ago. And this code section is relatively unchanged from our original zoning code. Those considerations I just listed would now apply to all types of developments. The one thing that doesn't change is that the city has and will continue to have the sole discretion over whether street access is achieved through public or private facilities. With the ordinance, we'd be repealing and reenacting section 609. That means we get rid of the entirety of the current text and rewrite it in full. And then we're also updating related definitions and cross references just to make sure that there's no conflicts. I will say that this code amendment is probably overdue. Some of you asked the good question of why this amendment now. And I don't expect that this change will result in significant changes in designs that come through our doors. I do think it could actually result in better designs in some cases. We included a couple of examples in the staff report, and that first example is one we've seen a few times now, a pattern we've seen a few times, where we're actually getting more curb cuts than we'd like to see in these smaller residential projects. We provided those 3 examples, again, just to illustrate the really wide range of context to which, for which this code section needs to work. This topic's coming before you tonight because the code section was mentioned earlier this year in the context of a development application at City Council. And after that hearing, the City Attorney's Office advised and worked with us to revise the code just to create some better clarity, and again, to make sure that it's applying to the development patterns that we're seeing in Wheat Ridge sort of in this era. That's everything I have in terms of preliminary comments. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. We did post this item as well on Wheat Ridge Speaks and didn't receive any comments. We do have one person still on the Zoom call too, if you want to take testimony before your deliberations.
Thank you. Commissioner Simbai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. This feels pretty complicated, so I'm hoping my fellow commissioners can ask some good questions that help me jump in as well. But I have one, Lauren, on page 36 of the document. I'm actually reading the new code. At the bottom, under section 1, letter B, use of private drives, roadways, and easements of record. I'll just read the whole thing. To the extent the development is proposed to rely upon access to the public roadway system through the use of private drives, roadways, and or recorded easements of record. Approval for the same may be granted or withheld by the city in its sole discretion based upon one or more of the following considerations. And so that line makes me wonder. So does that mean the city gets to approve? I mean, I guess this is what it says. Are we out of that purview at that point, planning commission or city council?
That's a good question. So there, you're not out of that purview. So we're, staff is always going to work with an applicant to make a recommendation or to get a design. The next section, letter C, is meant to say that whomever is the deciding body, whichever process a project needs to go through, the same code would apply. So if it's a staff level review, we have sort of that city authority. If it's a planning commission review, you do, and likewise if it goes to council. So this code section would be applied through whatever review process applies to the property.
Okay, thank you very much. No additional questions at this time, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Christopher.
Hi, thank you. I had a couple questions. So my reading, I guess to phrase this as a question, is there anything in your reading of the proposed new section that would require the city to consider any of those factors, or is it sort of in the discretion of the city to consider or not any of those listed factors?
Yeah, so I mean, what we're doing is memorializing all the factors that we consider right now. The sort of the real world application, if I may, that I think might illustrate is that sometimes we get people coming to us who say they want to do a private street. And sometimes that request is because it's expensive to build a public road right of way, or the public right of way design is quite a bit wider than what a private street could be. And, in our detached single family subdivisions, it's almost always going to be a public street. So we need the clear authority to say, no, you have to build a public street in this case. Conversely, there are instances where it makes sense to have some private facilities. You think about the corners, for example, those interior road networks. We were going to ask for that to be a public road, but they wanted to have the authority to plow it. They have a property owners association that can maintain it. They were designed to the width to accommodate fire trucks and detached sidewalks, so they look street-ish, but they're not public streets. But we didn't have anything in the code that sort of gave us the basis for either requiring something to be public or sort of clearly accepting the merits of the private facility. So what we wanted to do with this is is create some clear criteria and transparent criteria. So it's not just an access request that's going into a black box and we're sort of rolling the dice, yes or no, it can be private or public, but to make everybody aware of sort of the considerations and thought process that we're going through in making some of those decisions. Does that help in sort of a more real world application?
No, yeah, that makes sense, I guess, but sort of to then follow up on that, I guess I appreciate the listing of the factors, but there's nothing in the rewritten section that requires the city to necessarily consider any of those factors. Those are just things that the city typically would consider when considering a project. Am I understanding that right?
Right. So the default is you have direct access to a public street. If we're going to entertain something that's private, then those are the 8 considerations that we would use to either approve or deny such a request. Right. Does that help?
It does. But there's not necessarily anything in the new section that would preclude the city from considering other factors that are not necessarily listed in that section.
Yes, correct. Yeah. There's likely a fact pattern that we haven't thought of that doesn't exist in those 8 buckets, but I don't think it's written in too limiting of a way if that were to come up.
So in effect, what is taken into consideration is really completely in the discretion of the city. Is that a fair sort of characterization?
Right. In as much as the applicant doesn't get to dictate whether it's going to be private or public access, the city gets to always. Not in. I mean, in practical purposes, it's always sort of iterative and it's negotiated as we go along, but we get to be the ones with the final decision. They don't get to make that call.
And then just one other question. I noticed in factor number 3, it says whether the proposed roadway or easement is a logical design and meets requirements for fire access.
Mm-hmm.
When it says a logical design, is there any, I guess I'm struggling a little bit with what that could mean.
Sure, there's always going to be some subjectivity in some of these types of statements. But we have seen illogical designs and sort of a walks like a duck, talks like a duck kind of a situation. So we felt strongly that we needed to include something like that because there have been instances where we've seen a proposal at pre-app and said it's not logical. It just doesn't make sense. So what we ended up doing to sort of vet this code amendment at the staff level was throw out not just the 3 examples we shared with you, but like 15 examples from the last year or so to see how would it have stood up to some of the criteria and having, albeit subjective, the logical design was an important one in certain instances where it meets the code, but it's not, it just doesn't make sense. Sort of a Frankenstein design.
So I guess I'm wondering, and I'm sorry to harp on this, but if there was any consideration of actually providing sort of more restrictions on the city's ability to be what feels like relatively subjective about this, given that it's a non-exhaustive list of factors with this permissive language that the city may or may not consider one or more of the factors. And so I guess I'm wondering if there's any consideration of sort of providing more restrictions around that.
Well, so the context here and what I didn't share with you guys is the verbatim current language, and the challenge is our current language is actually more prescriptive and is what's creating the issue. For example, and we use the example of sort of the 4-unit limit. The 4-unit limit off of a private drive is resulting in 6, 7, 8 unit subdivisions where only 4 can use and share the cost of a private drive and the others go on the public street. So then you get 4 curb cuts instead of 1. So the prescriptive nature of the current code is actually why we're sort of swinging the pendulum back to something that seems like it can be a good basis for decision making, but is not quite as firm. Does that make sense? And sometimes the pendulum swings too far and that, we can adjust from there. but increasingly our infill development scenarios are just so case by case. We have a lot of long and narrow lots in Wheat Ridge, especially abutting Clear Creek and Lena Gulch that are old sort of fragmented farm properties. And sort of the weirder the infill lots, the more challenged the access code has been to result in logical site plans.
Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Larson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is on this kind of same topic here regarding some of the specificity in there in section 1B. I'm looking at numbers 5 and 6, and it says the number of one of the criteria considerations is the number of residential units or the amount of commercial property to be proposed, and then the length of the block or area being served. Is there not a rule of thumb if somebody was to walk in with a new idea tomorrow and say, I want to put 25 units on this one private drive, but I don't know, if that's going to be approved or not, or should they just, I don't know. Is there a rule of thumb or something that guides you?
Yeah, I think there are. So again, when we sort of vetted this, we tried to find a number. We said if 4 units isn't the right number, is there a better number? And we looked at sort of the past 15 years of developments to see if there was a common theme, or an average or some better number. And that didn't manifest because again, we're not sort of a flat rectangular greenfield community where all developments look the same. So we tried to find a number to say after such and such number of units, you have to do a public street. The sort of balance of voices in our development review team is our public works department, who would have to maintain anything public. For certain private facilities, after a period of time, those homeowners associations come to the city and say, can you take this over for us? Because they either weren't set up properly or their HOA dissolved. So we're trying to think about what's working in both the short term and the long term. There is a specific range for the length of a block in the mixed use code. So we do use that as a rule of thumb, and it's written as a range specifically with the understanding that we know our blocks are generally 300 by 600, but not always. So we do have some rules of thumb, but we tried and struggled to find the right number to put into this specific amendment.
I guess that sort of answers my question. Thank you.
Commissioner Kearns?
Okay. So if we approve this ordinance, does this require the city to take on maintenance of potentially substandard roadway facilities?
No, so it won't change any ownership of any existing facilities. What it will do is when we bring to you a future proposal, we'll be explaining why something is a public street or a private drive, probably more specifically as it relates to these criteria.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Commissioner Antal?
Yeah, I've kind of been feeling a little similar to what Commissioner Kirchner was saying, where, it is very permissive, and I understand it's to provide that flexibility, but I found myself trying to understand kind of what does the current city code say related to traffic access and circulation that provides that guidance, and what existing development standards are in place to kind of, I'm trying to understand why you need this change when either of those two pieces of regulatory guidance should provide you with the, the oomph you need to kind of address all those 8 criteria. And so maybe just if you could explain that to me a little better.
Sure. So I think where it comes up most often is to I anticipate using this code amendment most often to protect the city in instances where a developer wants to provide a substandard private facility and we can say, no, that's unacceptable. We're trying to protect your future homeowners and our future sort of infrastructure. It needs to be public. So that's fact pattern one. And then alternatively, there are some limitations right now in the code that say you can't have a private drive for more than 4, what we're interpreting as detached single families. And there are instances where we think it would be very appropriate to have a private driveway for more than 4 units. So those are the 2 biggest areas we need. The current code is broken in the 4-unit limit, I think, in our current development patterns. And we need a place to point to in the code for some developers sometimes to say, you know, we have the discretion to say, no, it can't be a substandard facility for these reasons.
And so current standards don't give you much control over kind of how, whether it's private or whether you require public access. I mean, maybe that's rhetorical based on what you just said, but.
Yeah, I mean, this code section is really, there's not a lot of other parts of the code. There's a lot of stuff in there about if you're doing a public street, then here's what the public street needs to look like. But there's not as much about that decision point of whether it should be public or private.
Okay.
And so I think there is a gap in the code right now.
Okay, I think that's everything. My only question for now.
Thank you. So I can see some merit, you know, if we look at one of our past cases that we just did that was on 30th and Kipling, you know, having, you know, if we could avoid curb cuts on that busy road and it only goes in the private, that, you know, that would make sense. So I understand that. Sometimes CDOT dictates a maximum number of curb cuts. I do have, and then on that one example, you had the, I think it was number 2, where you have the 6 lot and you have the 4 homes that share the drive, and then the other 2 are supposed to have curb cuts on Teller. It would just be, it depend on the situation. But if, you know, if it was just you know, a typical very small street, not a you know, minor arterial, I certainly would, you know, if there were homes across the street on the end, I think it'd be appropriate for the homes that are on the end to have the curb cuts facing the other homes. But then that little community kind of goes away, you know, where perhaps you should have the 2 homes facing. So it really depends on the context. So I think that's a good thing. But I do have a question on, you talked about like a max amount of lots. Is there, I guess, could you maybe just go over briefly, Lauren, like on say townhomes, there's not a specific number, but at what point do we, you know, when you're considering public versus private street, I think when I think public street, I'm thinking of that, okay, that's going to have some type of streetscape versus let's just say, you know, like you have a box, you have a square, and you're just going to cram as many townhomes as you can. You're using private streets, but the walkability score is probably pretty low because it's just homes facing homes. There, you know what I'm saying? There's no like a nice sidewalk in a streetscape versus what you would get on a public street. How does that factor in?
So from a walkability standpoint, sort of to Commissioner Antol's question, there are other code provisions that say you have to have safe pedestrian pathways. So we have confidence that there are facilities that are being provided for pedestrians through site design standards. The question of when does a townhome development have enough units to warrant public streets, because we have some with public streets and some without, is really more a factor of the size of the project, the acreage of the project, more so than the number of units involved. So if you think about, for example, Yarra Gardens, which I included this site plan for, it's a lot of units. I think it's like 89 units in total, but that acreage is not a city block, which for us is usually 300 by 600. If you think about the Toll Brothers development up at the TOD area, that's 200 units, so twice as big in terms of units, but quite a bit larger in terms of acreage. So they actually are building 3 public streets. So that's, in terms of those criteria, then we're starting to think about block length. So is the overall size of the project such that we have a mega block and we need to break it up with public streets? Or does a private drive that has sidewalk facilities sort of meet our needs for vehicular access, but also accommodate the pedestrian environment? So I think what we need is a code for access that achieves, smart design in terms of access and works well with our other design standards in terms of how building is oriented and how pedestrian navigates. Right now, our access code is not always sort of complementing some of our other standards. So we shouldn't be using access as a way to dictate the number of units that's allowed, right? We use the zoning code to dictate how many units. We need to use the access code to make sure the site is functioning appropriately in the short and long term. Does that help?
Yes. Are there any other questions from the commissioners? Okay, I will now open the hearing for public comment. If you wish to comment in this case, you'll have a maximum of 3 minutes to speak. Speakers may not donate their time. When I recognize you, please give us your name, spell your last name, and share your address. We will now mute all participants. Please keep background noise to a minimum. If you do not plan to speak at this time, you may mute yourself through your own device. Is there anybody signed up to speak?
We just have one person in the audience. So if you're here to speak about this topic, you're welcome to unmute yourself now.
Sounds like there's no one who wishes to speak. I will now close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend approval of the proposed ordinance repealing and reenacting section 26-609 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning access to public streets and making conforming amendments.
Is there a second? Any discussion? Okay, call for a vote.
Motion carries 5-0. And who was the second?
I think it was a 5-1.
Or sorry, 5-1. And who seconded the motion?
Who did second?
I don't think we had a second. I didn't hear anybody.
May have jumped the gun there.
You need to do that again?
Yeah, I just need somebody to, yep.
Is there a second? Thank you, Tammy.
Second.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. We will now call for a vote.
Motion carries 5-1.
Thank you. Okay, that is it for the cases. Is there any old business?
No old business. Well, maybe. It's not old, it's still current event. Our Let's Talk program, I think I've been giving you periodic updates. We still in the Bel Air and East Wheat Ridge neighborhoods. We have a survey that's been on What's Up Wheat Ridge for a while, and we're in the triple digits. So we've had, I think, close to 300 respondents combined in the 2 neighborhoods. It's been great. We've had 4 meetings that the city hosted. We're currently hosting meetings sort of on demand. So we're not meeting in driveways now that we're in the red level, but doing Zoom meetings for small groups of folks who want to talk about the Bel Air and East Wheat Ridge neighborhoods. So our mailing list, based on folks who participated in any of those meetings or one-on-one or through the survey, is now up to 500 folks. So we're getting great participation. So thanks to you all on the commission and to anybody else who's been sort of plugging the program. We're getting really great feedback. So we're excited about that. We'll have our second round of meetings in January after the holiday.
And Lauren, what's the timetable? What happens next?
Sure. So it's a sort of a 3-phase program. First phase is understanding sort of what are the topics. Second phase, which will be the January meetings, is what do we do about them? And third phase is an action plan that would be neighborhood specific, that has some sort of high, medium, low type actions that we can do to respond to some of the feedback that we're hearing. It's not just planning feedback. It's talking about trash and homelessness and traffic and sort of lots of different departments and divisions. So we'll prepare that summary report and action plan for the neighborhoods, present that to council, and then sort of identify if we can bite off some of those actions in the near future and then move on to those next 2 neighborhoods. We haven't identified which 2 will be next yet, but that's what will be our sort of first and second quarter of next year.
And when do you figure that report will be available?
I don't know the specific timelines. Our meetings are in January. I would think February or March, I think, is the goal. It's a lot of feedback to digest. We've sort of coded it all and tried to figure out how do you put 500 people's feedback in a 2-page summary is our goal. So
very carefully.
Yeah, right. It's been fun.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Is there any new business?
Our new business is just an update on sort of upcoming meetings. We will be having the December 3rd meeting. We have a land use case. You'll be receiving that packet electronically, I think a little bit early because of the Thanksgiving holiday. So we'll send that out probably next Tuesday. And then we also expect to have the December 17th meeting to talk about a code amendment related to short-term rentals.
And do you know, or can you share, do you know what's going on with the old Lucky's building?
I don't think they've, I know they've been exploring a few different options, including sort of having 2 tenants backfill that space, but I have not heard of a formal announcement on anybody yet.
Okay.
What about a potential tenant at the Gold's Marketplace? I know this isn't economic development, but there's a lot of activity there. Have you guys heard of anything?
I don't remember if they've announced. They're under permit. I think, did their site plan come to you all? Now I'm forgetting. Their master sign plan did.
The sign plan.
Yeah, they've got big plans and they're improving that whole streetscape. Lots of investment to sort of fix that up. I cannot remember if they have an anchor tenant there yet or not, or if COVID affected that. But I can check before the meeting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know what I'm hoping for, but any anchor tenant would be nice.
Yeah, agreed. It's an interesting time trying to tenant some of these spaces, I think.
I'm sure.
Is there any other new business?
None for me.
Lauren, you mentioned a December 3rd Planning Commission meeting. Is there any other Planning Commission meetings scheduled?
We'll use both the December 3rd and December 17th dates.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Call for vote.
Motion passed 6-0.
Have a good Thanksgiving, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Take care.